This is a Heyworth Oral History Project 2012 interview with Fontella Lou Henshaw Heycraft of 616 East Cole, number B, at Heyworth. The date is September 20th, 2012. My name is Richard Gray and I'm the interviewer for this session. We'll begin with a few questions, Fontella, about your earliest connections with the Heyworth area. Would you tell us about your early years in your family and just a little bit about your early life?
Well, I'll be happy to, Reverend Gray. When I was young, of course, I was like a lot of the others. I had a boyfriend. And my boyfriend was Marvin Heycraft, who lived in the Heyworth area. And so when we started dating, on the weekends usually, I would stay at the Heycrafts. And so of course I was in Heyworth a lot. So I met all of their friends, and through the years, a lot of those friends are still my friends, I hope. And it's been very interesting because I met a lot of people, and Heyworth is not that far from where I live, south of Bloomington. So I was well acquainted with Heyworth and people in Heyworth. On Saturday nights in Heyworth, they would have a dance, and that was sponsored by the VFW. And my husband, who I married my boyfriend, I should say that in later years, but my husband's aunt, Snowy Stevens, was a great worker in that organization, in the Ladies Auxiliary. And so she was in charge of all the dances they had. And she did a good job too. She kept everybody in line. But we had a lot of fun. And you just saw everybody, you know, the whole families would come into town. After all, that was about all that was going on in town at Heyworth, you know, on Saturday night. And so that just became a kind of a routine. And one of the ladies that most always played on the piano for the dance was Ferry Martin's mother, Meg Graves. Oh, she could play wonderful. She didn't even have to look hardly at the keys to play. And so that family, of course, was from the Heyworth area. And Ferry was a teacher over at Ben Funk School. So anyway, that is kind of what I remember. And then the Haycraft family, a lot of their friends, they would get together and play cards and have dinners. You know, they take potluck dinners to each other's house, and then they would play some kind of cards for entertainment. And I got well acquainted with a lot of those people too, so they were all in the area, you know, of Randolph and Heyworth, and so they had lots of fun at those parties. And once in a while, I have known them just to roll up a rug, and they'd ask me to play the piano, and they'd get up and dance a little, something to do. It was just all in fun, and everybody had a real good time. And that's a lot of what I remember about Heyworth. But they actually did not live at that time in the town of Heyworth. They lived up in the Randolph area. Of course, it was in this school district. And then they later moved into Heyworth because Marvin's father started farming Pearl Cusey and I can't think of his name right offhand, but Brooke and Pearl Cusey's farm right across from the grade school. And the land laid across the highway. And so Marvin's dad was farming some with Marvin, and so I would help him in the field too. So I've worked down here in the field back in our early married years and helped do things like that. So I saw quite a little bit of Heyworth.
Well, Fontella, I know you were a war bride. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, after dating for about 4 years, we wanted to get married, and Marvin, he didn't have to go to the service, but he wanted to. All of his friends were gone to the service, and it made him feel like he needed to. Not only just did he want to, he wasn't looking at it a fun thing, he was looking at it a thing that he needed to do for his country, and that he needed to do that along with his friends. So most of them were gone to the service, and so he had a hernia that he was born with, and he went so far as to sell his horse to get the money to get the hernia taken care of at the hospital. And while he was in the hospital, I'll have to add this, one of the nurses was Roland Miller's wife. I can't think of her name right now, but I know it as well as I know my own. But anyway, she was a nurse. She wasn't married to Roland Miller. That would be Daryl's mother. And she's still living up at Luther Oaks, I believe. Maxine is her name. And it's just a kind of a strange story how everything ties in together. But anyway, he had the operation, and as usual, like back in those days, they kept you in hospital for several days when they would have sent him home the same day today, but they sure didn't then. So after that all healed up, then he went to the service. And so when he came back a year later on furlough, we had planned our wedding. So we had 7 days. Just 7 days till he was going to be someplace else, sent someplace. We didn't know where, had no idea whether it would be in the States or whether it would be someplace else. So I was living with my grandparents. My parents died when I was very young. They had operations, and actually today they wouldn't have died, I don't believe, because they didn't have anything at all for infections. And you know, many people had operations and died from poisoning, and they called it gangrene. Well, that's what they both died of. So my mother's folks were the ones we lived with, and they went right ahead and kept my brother and I, and we never had any changes to make at all with our family life. So that worked out real good. And my grandmother couldn't drive. She'd never learned to drive. So I stayed home instead of getting a job with them while Marvin was gone. After we were married, I stayed there and kind of became a hired, whatever you want to call it, hand, I guess, because I could drive the tractor and do some of the work and help my grandfather, because I didn't want him to have to hire someone else, because we'd have to put him up in the house, and we were going to move on the other farm that my grandfather owned that was his home place over on Route 66. It was Route 66 then. It's I-55 now. So that's what went on for about a year, and I worked in the field. Of course, I always milked cows all my life, morning and night. When I went to high school, I still milked cows. When I brought my friends home to visit, they had to go to the cow barn with me. But that was okay. I never minded that, and they enjoyed it. So then when Marvin came home in September of '45, that's when we planned to get married. So we had all the plans made. I know I didn't have to spend as much time on plans as what they do today. You know how they do today. It takes about a year or two to get the wedding going. Well, it didn't take that long for us. And we had a nice wedding too. And we were married at the First Christian Church, the old First Christian Church, the original one in Bloomington. And then we had 7 days. Well, everybody was wanting to entertain or to do something. So they decided to have a chivalry on us. And in order to get the job done, they contacted my aunt, who was almost like my mother when I was growing up. She was so good to me. She never had any children, and so her and her husband made arrangements to take Marvin and I out to eat. Well, that was to get us away from all the plans they had made. And so then we went back, and here were all these people after we ate. See, here's all these people at the house, at my grandparents' house. And they had quite a party, you know, whatever. And so we just had a lot going on. And so then when he had to leave, well, I will have to tell you something else. Excuse me for, this is not a planned thing, as you can tell the way I'm talking, but our honeymoon was in Peoria. That's not very far away, is it? Well, anyway, that's where we went, was Peoria. And when we went in the hotel, we stayed in, well, I can't think of that right now, but it's the one that's been there so long.
Pier or something?
Yes, that one. And we stayed in that one, and Marvin had to sign the papers 2 or 3 times to get it signed right, to sign it as Mr. and Mrs. That was something different. So that was our honeymoon, and when he had to leave, we found out they was sending him to Japan. Well, that was devastating. I cried, and I cried, and I cried. But anyway, I stayed right on it at home, and we worked on the house, and I worked, you know, for my grandfather, and got it all ready. So when he come home, then he would get out the following fall and be released. And so we worked on this house, and we done quite a little bit. That's been a long time ago, you know. Everything was different. It was a big farmhouse. It was a nice farmhouse. It was my great-grandmother's house, and of course it had great meaning to all the family all around. They all went there for the Christmases and all the holidays, and grandmother was kind of like a matriarch, you know. What grandmother said went, and my aunt that had never married, I think grandmother really wouldn't let her because she needed her with her as her to accompany her, and so they lived together in this big house. So that's the house that we were moving in, and we got it all fixed up, and it was really nice when we got done. All new carpet, had the prettiest carpet. We had a kind of a soft rose color, just a clip like carpet, and it didn't have any design in it, and it made everything larger, and it was so pretty. I thought, oh, I was just so proud of that. And I'll have to say, at that time we didn't have a flush toilet there, but grandmother, she thought she was right uptown because she had a chemical bathroom, and you know, it worked. It was just fine. We never thought anything of it. So that's what we had when we first moved in that house. And, oh, we had to wait in line for whatever we wanted. We tried to get a car, and we couldn't get a car. We tried to get a refrigerator, and we couldn't get a refrigerator. We tried to get a stove, and we couldn't get a stove. Well, after so long a time, my uncle knew of a person that run a store in Bloomington pretty well, and he talked to him to see if there was any way that he could manage to get us something so we could get started. Well, he put our name on the list, so we were going to get we got the refrigerator from him, and then the stove, I forget where we got it, but I had to use an oil stove, which worked. Everything like that works when you have to do it, you know. And then we bought a used car. There was no other way. We was going to get a new Ford, we thought. But that didn't happen. But we got a used one. So we had a great time. We got moved in, and we were happy as larks, you know, and I was so proud to be in my great-grandmother's house. The woodwork in that house was all, kind of, you know, how they would take a comb and go over the woodwork and make it look grained. That has a name, but I can't think of that right now. But anyway, it was a nice old house, and it really looked nice when we got done with it. We lived in that for about 6 months. When we moved in the fall. And when spring come around, we decided we needed to go on a vacation. We hadn't had a honeymoon, so we would go to Florida. So a lot of you will know who I'm talking about when I say, because they were from down in this area too. Lola Jones that married Dick Jones, and Verna Jones's son. A lot of you knew Verna well. And we decided to go to Florida. It was Lola and I. She was Lola Alexander. We had been friends ever since we were 5 years old. So we decided to take this trip. We said we'd take our car. Well, it was a business coupe. Well, it had a place for a seat in the back, but the seat wasn't in there. I suppose who'd had it used it, you know, to carry their satchels and things in there. So we fixed a board in there and padded it. And Lola and I sat on that board all the way to Florida, and we just thought that was great. We stopped on the way down to visit Marvin's cousin down around Louisville. Stayed all night there, and his wife got up and fixed biscuits and gravy, and oh, such a wonderful Southern breakfast, you know. Well, we thought that was something. And then we went on to Jacksonville, Florida, and stayed all night with Lola's aunt. And we had a great time there. And we just done things down around Florida and thought we had a wonderful time. And when we got back, it wasn't any time till we had this was in March. This is hard to believe. When I tell you this, you're going to think, well, you must be wrong on the date. But I know I'm not wrong on the date. It was the 25th of March, and we hadn't been home very long from this trip. And there was an awful snowstorm. Oh my goodness. It just simply stopped the traffic on Highway 66. They could just barely get through. All the roads had snow to the fence tops. The 25th of March, imagine. And so Marvin had gone up to the filling station up by Miller Park. Our place was just south of Bloomington, I said, on 66. And he went up there because he couldn't do anything, but he could get up there, you know. And I just stayed home. I didn't want to go. And I began to hear a lot, the electricity was off. See, that was one thing, and it wasn't much you could do without electricity. You know how that is. And so I just was sitting around there, and I began to hear a noise, and it was popping and snapping, and I saw something coming out of the carpet in the living room that looked like steam, white. It was white. And I went in and kind of crawled around on the rug and felt to see if it was hot, you know, or whether, I thought maybe the water heater that was on the furnace, they had a lot of those back in those days, you know, but if the furnace wasn't going, you didn't have hot water, but if it was, you had a lot of hot water. And so it was supposed to be going, and so I thought, it's empty, see, the lights, the electricity was out, and I was afraid it would blow up. Well, that wasn't what it was at all. The house had caught on fire because the furnace overheated and caught the floor because there was no power to push the blower, which we didn't know you had to do anything to the blower if the electricity went off. I know it had been off a lot of other times and nobody else done anything to open the blower up or anything. So anyway, our house burned down and burned everything up. So that was our first part of our married life experience. But we were thankful that nothing happened to us. And I cried, of course, and my grandfather at that time, he owned that farm, and he said, now sis, you quit that crying. He said, nobody got hurt, everybody's okay, we can replace all these other things, but we can't replace you and the people. And I said, I know that. You've got to be reasonable about that sort of thing. So that was my experience with our first years.
Fontella, you've mentioned the family place was along Route 66. Tell me a little bit more. Wasn't it where Nestle Bikes is? Or
yes, Nestle Bikes is there now.
In the place where you grew up. And then, Fontella, you've been a speaker all of your life, and you've spoken at churches and organizations and the DAR, and I know that you've written songs and things. Back when you were younger, you've told me about when you would go to small schools and give programs, and some of those were rural Heyworth schools. Tell me about that just a little bit.
Well, when I was about 15 or 16, I always said I was born a ham, and I've always been a ham, and I guess I'll die one. But they used to call it, would you give a reading, they'd say, you know. And I started writing my own material to give a reading about whatever. Maybe it would be about the occasion that they were having, whether it was Christmas or what's going on. I'd try to do something that would go along with this, with the theme. And I did go to all the schools south of Bloomington, the one-room schools. That was back in one-room days, and you know, they would always have their potlucks and their Christmas and their fellowship meetings and whatever. They were always having a community get-together. And you know, everybody went, whether you had kids or not. They would come to the school for those socials, box socials. Oh, they were popular, where every woman would fix a box and bring it. They'd make money with it, and they'd sell the box, you know. And especially if somebody had a young girl, like me, would take a box, then somebody would just have a lot of fun bidding against Marvin. So he wouldn't get my box. But as I remember, he always ended up with it. We didn't do too much of that ourselves, but there was a lot of things like that that went on. They would make money by choosing somebody. They would nominate somebody, say, who's the most popular young lady? Or who's the man that's got the longest foot? And just who's the best cook in the community? Oh my, would they ever bid on